Mr. Secretary, I want to thank you for having come here today and for willing to close this 7th Elcano Forum on Global Terrorism, organized this year not only in cooperation with the American Embassy but also with the Secretary of State for Security. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you all. I imagine that you will be grateful if I am brief because it is already very late, and I promise I will be. Thank you to Royal Institute Elcano for having invited us to participate as Secretary General of Penitentiary Institutions, and secondly for granting me the honor of closing this event within the cross-cutting perspective that the terrorist jihadist phenomena has to be approached. We obviously include the issue of the sentenced people for these crimes. So we have to have a twofold approach, which is what we try to do. First, the security and control of the people in prison, and secondly, the treatment of the sentenced to make sure they are reinserted and to prevent them from radicalizing other inmates. Prisons can be places for radicalization. It is very feasible that vulnerable people become terrorists. There are certain circumstances that happen in prison when you're sentenced to feel isolated, to be far from your family, to be socially isolated, to have group belonging wish, future expectations lack, and resentment for the system. All this together fosters, promotes having a cohesion group, and people who went in prison for a crime that had nothing to do with terrorism end up being engaged by terrorist organizations. That is why we must carry out preventive measures in the penitentiary institutions. As you have heard, in Spanish prisons nowadays are 265 people who are specially followed up and dealt with because they are involved or they have been involved in terrorism. In the recent history of our country, some events have taken place in the past years which have determined the type of system, the type of actions that you have had the opportunity to listen to from the last speaker. The determining date was on March 11th, 2004, with the terrorist attacks in Madrid. Since 2004, in the prisons, we classify inmates in three groups. Group A, people who have been sentenced because of terrorist actions. Right now, 140 people fall into this group. Then we have a second group, which is what we call radicalizing agents, people who go to prison not for a terrorist action, but because of their leadership and their personality are capable of persuading and convincing others. This is a more reduced group. They are defined as Group B, and we have 49 people fall into this group. And then we would have the third group with 76 people who are subject because they're vulnerable, because they don't have the right personality. These might be people who are in prison for non-terrorist actions, but who could be engaged. This division was already done back in 2004. The history of how we have tackled terrorism in prison is greatly conditioned, as you have heard and you can imagine, because of the experience that Spain has already had for more than 40 years with regards to the national terrorist phenomena of ETA. This meant that in 2008 some follow-up and control groups were created in Spanish prisons to control and follow up people who had been sentenced due to terrorism, drug traffickers, and people belonging to these groups that are in prison. All these people have been classified in a file, the so-called FETG. In no way does it mean that they do not enjoy their rights in prison. This should be very clear. The file has been controlled from the Supreme Court, and it has been authorized with certain requirements set forth by the Supreme Court. We, in this way, classify so that we can generate an alarm, in the sense that any penitentiary decision that is taken regarding a person included in this file, before the penitentiary decision is made, we have to be aware and we have to know that this person is linked to a terrorist action, and this is assessed so that no decision is made without being aware of who is the person that is going to be affected by this decision. This is why the FETG file was created in 2011. Before then, back in 2008, the follow-up and control groups were created, 200 professionals distributed throughout almost all prisons. Maybe some few prisons do not have a control and follow-up group, but the rest do. In the specific case of terrorist sentenced inmates and jihadist sentenced inmates, Spain has done exactly the same as they have done with ETA members, that they should not be altogether in the same prison. That is why the number of people, the 265, are distributed in 53 different prisons. Out of the 51 penitentiaries that we are responsible, 71 centers that I'm responsible for, these people are distributed throughout 53. So the decision has been to disperse them instead of grouping them. In 2014, a protocol for radicalization prevention was put in place, and in 2015 it was determined that the jihadists inmates would be classified within this control file. To belong to this group, to this file, means, amongst other things, that all their communications are intervened, are controlled. And this is absolutely legal. Obviously, to have communication control, it requires the legal authorization. In 2016, the program that has been presented to you before, that of intervention and treatment of ideological radicalization process, took place because we want to make sure that violence disappears. We do not try to control their worship or their religion, but we want to make sure that the lifestyle is free from violence. We respect worship freedom. Religion is not the reason for being in prison. We authorize, of course, the presence of worship leaders as something natural in prisons, and all this falls within this program where we right now have 46 people involved on a voluntary basis, as opposed to what happens in other countries, in Egypt or Malaysia, where there is even physical penalties. The treatment is voluntary, especially considering that these type of crimes are ideological in nature in most of the cases. As I was telling you, 46 people are following this program, a program that has a minimum duration of 6 months, but depends on the personal circumstance. It is done case by case. It is done with a technical team in the prison, and this program is also linked to the personal coordination in each prison. And just to tell you that as a last tool, we have created a risk assessment protocol. Both this program and the risk assessment is ongoing. In fact, next month we will have a meeting with the external agents who are evaluating both the program and the assessment tool to make sure in what extent can they be improved. And I'm almost done. I just wanted to say that in the Spanish case, we must be doing something right, since the EU has chosen Spain as the training country in Turkey. We have been doing this already for a year. We still have 1 year to go, and Spain is the country which is responsible for training the Turkish officials. In fact, every week a group of Spanish professionals go to Turkey to carry out this training, specifically for Turkish prisons officials, to train them on how to deal with these terrorist inmates. I had the opportunity to present in Paris the Spanish experience because I wanted to know how do we tackle this problem in Spain. I can also assure you, I can guarantee, and it is a great satisfaction for me to say that the coordination between penitentiary institutions and the police forces is total and full, and this is due to the fact that within the penitentiary institutions we have a team for security coordination, which is made up by members of the police forces who have to, in real time, communicate to the police forces any decision that has to do, any action that has to do with an inmate related to terrorism. The first to know are the police forces. And as a challenge, I have to tell you that the challenge we have right now is to tackle with the regulation of people who are on bail. Law 2010 introduces the security measure. This is something that takes place once you finish your sentence, and it can have 11 limitations or requests, one of which is the follow-up that can be agreed upon by the sentencing court for a person who has been sentenced due to terrorism actions. And this follow-up can go up to 10 years, where the police forces in cooperation with the penitentiary institution, will carry out a follow-up and a control of these people. This is a short-term challenge. So far, we did not have the problem because the sentences were for 10 years. So there's people who are going to leave the prison very shortly, and we will have these people who will be in the street. So this is important for this type of actions, but we have to say that other type of crimes, like sexual crimes, will follow this type of request of surveillance after they leave the prison. Well, thank you very much. Nothing else. I hope this event has been very useful, and we will always be at your disposal for anything you need. Thank you. Thank you, Secretary, for this sum up of the different measures that have been introduced in Spain since 2004, since March 11th, which are especially important in an event like today's, because there were individuals who were radical when they went to prison, or who became radicalized in prison, and when they left, they became foreign fighters and went to Iraq. And congratulations, because I imagine you know this well, but the management of radicalization prevention in Spanish prisons is a well-recognized model amongst prison professionals and political managers within the European Union. Thank you very much, Secretary, for having been here with us. And we now close this 7th Forum, Royal Institute Elcano.